Welcome. If you found yourself drawn to these words, you are likely someone who has grown tired of the noise, tired of the constant clamoring for attention, the relentless demand to broadcast your victories, the exhausting performance of success that has become our cultural default. Perhaps you've noticed that the loudest voices are not always the wisest, and that those who truly accomplish remarkable things often do so in the margins, away from the glare of public scrutiny. This script is an invitation to embrace a different way, the way of the Stoic, where victory is internal before it becomes external, and where silence becomes not a weakness, but your greatest strength. The ancient Stoics understood something profound that we seem to have largely forgotten, that true power lies not in the thunder of announcement, but in the consistency of action. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, wrote his meditations in private, never intending them for publication. Epictetus taught in quiet corners, his words spreading through the genuine transformation of those who heard them. Seneca built his wisdom while attending to the business of daily life, never needing validation from crowds. These were not people who whispered because they were afraid. They were people who understood that the most profound work happens in silence, and that silence itself is a form of strength. In a world that constantly insists you prove yourself, this is a radical proposition. What if your greatest victories are the ones no one sees? What if the person you become in private is infinitely more important than the persona you project in public? What if winning in silence is not about hiding your light, but about burning so steadily and so true that you need no external validation to feel its warmth? This is the Stoic Guide to Winning in Silence. Let's talk about the nature of true victory. Before we speak of winning in silence, we must first understand what winning actually means. Our culture has trained us to define victory in remarkably shallow terms. More money, more followers, more recognition, more status. We measure success in metrics that others can see and judge, because we have outsourced the authority to determine our own worth to the watching world. This is a catastrophic error, and the Stoics knew it. Victory, in the Stoic sense, is the alignment of your actions with your values. It is the development of your character. It is the strengthening of your virtue. When you wake up and choose discipline over comfort, when you respond to insult with equanimity, when you persist through difficulty without complaint, when you give without expectation of return, these are victories. They are victories that no one need witness. They are victories that belong entirely to you. The Stoic understands that there are things within their control and things beyond it. Your external circumstances, your reputation, whether others recognize your achievements, these are largely beyond your control. What remains within your control is extraordinary. Your thoughts, your judgments, your intentions, your responses, your character itself. This is where true winning happens. Consider the athlete who trains alone in the pre-dawn darkness. Long before any competition, every rep is a victory. Every moment of sustained effort is a win. Most of these victories will go unwitnessed. But the athlete knows something crucial. The victory comes first in practice, in private, in the unglamorous repetition. The competition is merely the confirmation of victories already won. This is the Stoic athlete's understanding. This is the Stoic understanding of everything worth doing. When you begin to understand victory this way, something remarkable happens. The pressure disappears. The anxiety about whether others are noticing, whether you're being recognized, whether you're getting credit, all of this noise falls away. You are left with something pure and crystalline. The direct experience of becoming a better version of yourself. No applause required, no validation needed. The reward is intrinsic, and it is absolute. The Stoic who wins in silence is not rejecting success or achievement. Rather, they are reordering the hierarchy of what matters. They understand that genuine achievement is built on a foundation of private discipline, and they attend to that foundation with meticulous care. The external victories come naturally, almost as an afterthought, because they flow from a character that has been shaped through countless invisible wins. Now let's talk about the burden of broadcasting. Let us speak plainly about what it costs to constantly broadcast your life, your achievements, your victories. The hidden price of constant visibility is nothing less than your autonomy. When you perform your life for an audience, you have surrendered the power to define yourself. Your worth becomes dependent on others' interpretations. Your peace becomes hostage to their approval or disapproval. Think of the energy expended in maintaining a public persona, the careful curation of what to share, the strategic timing of announcements, the crafting of narratives, the monitoring of responses, the management of criticism, the endless anxiety about whether you're being perceived as you wish to be perceived. This is exhausting. It is also futile, for no matter how carefully you construct your image, It will always be filtered through the perceptions, biases, and limited understanding of those observing you. You cannot control how you are seen. The Stoic recognizes this futility and does something radical. They stop trying. Not because they don't care about their work. They care immensely. Not because they have abandoned the pursuit of excellence. They pursue it with total commitment. But they have freed themselves from the need to make sure everyone knows about it. This freedom is everything. Seneca, one of the wisest Stoics, wrote extensively about the dangers of performing for the masses. He understood that the moment you begin to shape your behavior based on what others might think, you have placed the seat of your power outside yourself. You have made yourself dependent on forces you cannot control. This is the opposite of freedom. The Stoic path is to reclaim your seat of power, to locate it firmly within your own character, and to attend to your inner development with complete disregard for external applause. Moreover, there is something spiritually corrosive about constantly broadcasting. It trains your mind to value the external over the internal. It teaches you to care more about appearance than reality. It creates a fragmentation within yourself. The part that acts and the part that performs acting, forever separated. The Stoic seeks integration. They seek to become one unified person, whose private self and public self are not at odds but aligned. When you stop broadcasting, something surprising happens. People often become more genuinely curious about you. Authenticity has a magnetism that performance can never match. The person who is clearly not trying to convince you of their worth is somehow more compelling than the person who is constantly lobbying for your approval. This is the paradox. In surrendering the need to be seen, you become more visible. In accepting silence, your work begins to speak louder than any announcement could. Let's talk about the strength of consistency. One of the most underestimated virtues in our age of constant novelty and disruption is consistency. Consistency is not glamorous. It is not mentioned in motivational speeches. It will not trend on social media. And yet, consistency is the bedrock upon which all genuine achievement is built. The Stoic understands that the way to win is to show up. Not once, not when you feel inspired, not when the conditions are perfect, but again and again, in the repetitive, unglamorous, entirely predictable way of someone who has made a decision and follows through on it. This is what the ancient Stoics called training, ascesis, the daily, disciplined practice of virtue. Marcus Aurelius did not become the man we know through occasional moments of philosophical insight. He became that man through the daily practice of examining his thoughts, of checking his judgments, of bringing his mind back to reason again and again, thousands of times in the privacy of his own consciousness. Nobody witnessed these victories. Nobody was keeping score, and yet they accumulated day by day, year by year, into a character of extraordinary strength and wisdom. This is the actual mechanism of winning. Not talent, not luck, not connections, not a single brilliant stroke, but the accumulation of small, daily victories, each one as invisible as the last. The athlete who trains when no one is watching, the writer who shows up to the blank page day after day, the entrepreneur who builds systems and processes without concern for whether anyone notices, the parent who consistently shows up with patience and presence, the student who studies not for the grade but for mastery. When you embrace consistency as your primary strategy, a remarkable shift occurs. You are no longer dependent on external conditions being perfect. You are no longer waiting for the moment of inspiration or the optimal circumstances. You simply show up and do the work. In showing up consistently, you discover something, that the work itself is the victory. The showing up is the winning. Each day that you honor your commitment, you have won. No one needs to know. Furthermore, consistency has a compounding effect that is invisible in the short term but staggering in the long term. The compound interest of small, repeated actions is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. A person who improves 1% per day, a wholly reasonable and achievable goal, will be 37 times better in a year. Most of these improvements will go unnoticed, but they will compound. They will accumulate. They will create a person and a body of work that cannot be ignored. The Stoic who wins in silence is betting on consistency. They understand that slow, steady progress will eventually overtake the flashy start. They are content to be the tortoise, moving at a reliable pace, knowing that time itself is their ally. And when success finally does arrive, when others finally do notice the quality of the work, the Stoic is already so far along the path that the recognition is almost incidental. The real victory happened months or years before, in private, in the daily choice to show up and do better. The Stoics had a specific word for the internal state we should cultivate: apatheia. This is often mistranslated as apathy, which suggests a cold lack of caring. But this is profoundly wrong. Apatheia means freedom from harmful emotions, specifically, the freedom from the kind of emotional reactivity that damages judgment and diminishes peace. It is not about not caring. It is about caring in a way that is rational, measured, and aligned with your values. When it comes to winning in silence, cultivating this apatheia toward external recognition is essential. This does not mean you don't care about doing good work. It means you are indifferent to whether that work receives applause. You are indifferent to whether you receive credit. You are indifferent to whether others recognize your excellence. This indifference is not a failure of ambition. It is the highest form of freedom. Think about how your anxiety and suffering increase in direct proportion to how much you care about others' judgments. If you deeply care about being recognized as talented, you will suffer when someone else gets the recognition. If you deeply care about being seen as successful, you will suffer when your success goes unnoticed. If you deeply care about being liked, you will suffer endlessly at the prospect of displeasing anyone. The Stoic path out of this suffering is clear. Loosen your grip on external things. Care about them less. Become indifferent to outcomes you cannot control. This is not cynicism. It is clarity. It is the recognition that your peace cannot depend on things outside your control. If your happiness depends on being recognized, you have placed your happiness in the hands of people whose judgments are beyond your control. This is an excellent recipe for perpetual suffering. The alternative is to recognize that your worth is not determined by others' recognition of it. You know your character. You know your effort. You know your virtue. This knowledge is enough. The irony, and it is delicious, is that this indifference often leads to greater recognition. When you stop trying to be recognized, you become more genuinely accomplished. When you stop trying to be liked, people like you more, because your authenticity is no longer compromised by the attempt to please. When you stop needing credit, the quality of your work improves, because you're not dividing your energy between doing the work and managing how the work is perceived. The path to recognition is often to stop pursuing it. Epictetus, a slave in Rome, taught that true freedom comes not from changing your external circumstances, but from changing your relationship to them. A slave cannot control whether he is enslaved, but he can control whether he accepts the judgment that being enslaved makes him less worthy, less valuable, less capable of virtue. And in this control, he is free, more free perhaps, than many free men who are enslaved to the need for recognition and status. This is the power of cultivating indifference to external things. It is the power of refusing to let circumstances determine your worth. There is an art to pursuing excellence while remaining quiet about it. It is not about doing less. It is about letting the work speak for itself. It is about understanding that your job is to do the best work you are capable of, and the work's job is to find its audience. These are separate concerns. If you conflate them, you will corrupt both. The quiet excellist does not cut corners, does not lower standards, does not phone it in. On the contrary, they pursue excellence with absolute commitment, but they pursue it for the thing itself, not for external validation. They polish the work to perfection because excellence is its own reward, not because they expect anyone to notice the polish. They bring their full attention and care to every task, not because they're being watched, but because this is the kind of person they have decided to be. This is not an easy path. It is psychologically much more difficult to work hard when no one is watching than when you have an audience. The moment someone is observing you, the work becomes a kind of performance. And performance is motivating in its own strange way. To work hard for an audience that isn't there, to maintain the same standards when you're alone as when you're watched, requires a kind of integrity that is rare. And yet this is precisely what separates true excellence from mediocrity. Pretending to be excellent, the true master has the same standards in private as in public. The true artist does work that is whole and complete whether or not anyone ever sees it. The true athlete trains at the same intensity whether the cameras are rolling or not. This consistency of standards, this refusal to have a private self with lower expectations, is what builds genuine mastery. The Stoics understood that there is something noble, even sacred, in doing excellent work simply because it is excellent, not for reward, not for recognition, but because excellence is a form of virtue, and virtue is its own reward. The craftsman who makes beautiful work because he respects his craft. The teacher who teaches with full presence because she respects her students and the subject matter. The athlete who trains with full intensity because he respects his potential and his sport. These people are not pursuing recognition. They are pursuing something deeper and more meaningful, the realization of their potential through excellent work. When you make this shift, When you begin to pursue excellence for its own sake rather than for what it might earn you, something alchemical happens. Your work becomes better, your peace becomes deeper, your resilience increases because you're no longer fragile to the judgments of others. You have grounded your sense of accomplishment in something stable, the knowledge that you did excellent work, regardless of how it was received. Let's talk about the strength of privacy. We live in a culture that has pathologized privacy. Privacy is seen as hiding. The refusal to broadcast is interpreted as shame or insecurity. The preference for quiet is understood as weakness or antisocial behavior. This is a profound distortion of the truth. Privacy is a sanctuary. It is the space in which you become who you are, away from the distorting gaze of others. It is in privacy that you can be authentic, can make mistakes without an audience, can develop ideas before they're ready, can do the unglamorous work of real growth. The person who does all their developing in public, constantly adjusting based on feedback and observation, is like a tree trying to grow while its growth is being constantly evaluated and directed. The tree that grows in privacy, sheltered from the gaze, is the one that develops the strongest roots. The Stoic values privacy not because they have something to hide, but because they understand that certain kinds of growth require protection from external judgment. The businessman who does not announce his business plans publicly is not hiding. He is protecting the space in which strategy can develop without interference. The writer who does not share her work until it is finished is not insecure. She is protecting her creative process from the pressure to justify or explain herself before she is ready. The person who lives privately, without constantly broadcasting their life, is not antisocial. They are protecting their inner life from the fragmenting effect of constant performance. There is a particular kind of power that comes from the knowledge that you do not depend on being seen. You are becoming excellent whether anyone notices or not. You are building something of value whether or not the world validates it. This knowledge is deeply stabilizing. It frees you from the need to constantly perform, constantly curate, constantly manage your image. You are allowed to simply be and to work and to become. Furthermore, privacy protects you from a subtle corruption that can infect even noble ambitions. When you are constantly aware that others are watching, observing, judging, there is an almost irresistible temptation to do things not because they are right, but because they will be perceived as right. To say things not because you believe them, but because they will be seen as wise. To help not because you genuinely want to, but because it will be seen as virtuous. This corruption of motive is insidious, precisely because it can coexist with outwardly excellent behavior, but it robs the behavior of its true worth. The Stoic does not need to worry about this corruption, because they are not performing for anyone. Their actions are aligned with their convictions, because there is no audience to perform for. They are free to act from genuine conviction, and this freedom is priceless. One of the most dangerous aspects of the constant broadcasting culture is the fragmentation of attention it creates. Your mind is divided between the task at hand and the concern about how the task is being perceived. Your energy is split between doing the work and documenting the work, between accomplishing and performing. This division of attention is lethal to genuine mastery. The Stoic who wins in silence has reclaimed their attention. Their focus is singular, on the work itself, not on how the work will be received, not on who will notice it, not on what it will lead to, just on the work. This kind of focused attention is what allows for genuine flow states, for the deep work that actually changes things, for the kind of concentration that is necessary for real mastery. There is a reason that the greatest artists, scientists, and thinkers often withdraw from society to do their best work. It is not misanthropy. It is the protection of attention. They understand that certain kinds of work cannot be done while simultaneously managing a public presence. The person who is trying to maintain their image while doing creative work is like someone trying to run while holding an egg. The egg might break, and the running will be awkward either way. The Stoic is willing to make this sacrifice. They are willing to be less visible in order to be more excellent. They understand that there is a trade-off between breadth of visibility and depth of accomplishment, and they choose depth. They are willing to be seen by fewer people if it means they can do work that is worth seeing. This discipline of focus extends beyond just the work itself to include the kind of environment you create for yourself. The Stoic is cautious about the company they keep, the media they consume, the information they allow into their mind, not because they are afraid, but because they understand that these things shape the quality of their thinking and the trajectory of their attention. To win in silence is to protect your attention fiercely. Furthermore, this focus on the work itself, rather than on external validation, actually accelerates progress. When you stop worrying about being recognized as talented and just focus on getting better, you get better faster. When you stop trying to convince people of your worth and just focus on building something of value, what you build becomes more valuable. The removal of the concern about external judgment is like removing an enormous weight you didn't realize you were carrying. Suddenly you can move faster. Let's talk about the practice of virtue in obscurity. The heart of Stoic practice is the development of virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These virtues are cultivated in daily life, in the small choices, in the moments no one is watching. It is in these obscure moments that you have the greatest opportunity to actually develop character. When someone is watching you, it is relatively easy to behave well. You have external motivation, the desire to be perceived well. But when no one is watching, when you could easily compromise and no one would know, the choice to maintain your virtue is genuine. It is real, it is not performed but actual. This is where character is built. The employee who does their work with integrity, even when their boss is not watching, this person is building character. The student who refuses to cheat, even though they could get away with it, this person is building character. The person who is honest when a lie would be more convenient, who is kind when unkindness would be easier, who maintains their standards when lower standards would not be noticed. These people are doing the real work of becoming the person they intend to be. The Stoic understands something that modern culture often misses, that private virtue is more important than public virtue. A person can appear virtuous for an audience while being full of corruption internally. A person can perform integrity while being fundamentally dishonest. But a person who maintains virtue in private, when no one is watching, when it would be easy to let it slip, this person is genuinely becoming virtuous. Marcus Aurelius, as the most powerful man in Rome, had endless opportunities to justify indulgences, to bend rules for his own benefit, to take advantage of his position in ways that would be invisible to most, and yet he maintained the same standards of justice, temperance, and self-discipline in private that he maintained in public. This is not accidental. This is the deliberate practice of virtue in obscurity. There is particular power in doing good in a way that cannot possibly benefit you. When you give anonymously, when you help someone who will never repay you, when you maintain your integrity in a situation where dishonesty would go undetected and benefit you. In these moments you are practicing virtue in its purest form. The Stoic cultivates these moments. They seek out opportunities to do right for no reward, to sacrifice for no recognition, to maintain their character when no one but they would know the difference. This practice has a profound effect. It trains you to value virtue for its own sake. It separates virtue from vanity. It teaches you to be good not because it looks good, but because goodness is intrinsically valuable, and it builds a character that can be relied upon. A person who is virtuous in private is virtuous. A person who is virtuous only when being watched is merely performing, and their virtue is only skin deep. As you move deeper into the practice of winning in silence, something begins to shift in what holds meaning for you. The victories that matter change. The things you care about recalibrate. The measures by which you judge yourself evolve. You no longer measure your day by whether anyone noticed what you did. You measure it by whether you showed up with integrity, whether you did your best, whether you were true to your values. You no longer measure your work by how many people like it. You measure it by how true it is, how excellent it is, how much of yourself you poured into it. You no longer measure your success by external recognition. You measure it by the person you are becoming. This shift in what holds meaning is not depressing. It is liberating. It frees you from the impossible task of getting 7 billion people to notice and validate you. It allows you to set standards that you can actually meet. It creates a kind of peace that is impossible to achieve through external validation. Because external validation is by nature unreliable and subject to forces outside your control. The Stoic who has made this shift experiences a peculiar kind of victory. They have stopped needing the world's permission to feel good about themselves. They have stopped waiting for applause to know that their work has value. They have made themselves independent, and in that independence is a strength that nothing can shake. This is not about arrogance or independence from community. The Stoic remains social, remains engaged, remains concerned with justice and the welfare of others. But they are no longer dependent on external validation to maintain their sense of self-worth. They have learned to be their own authority, And this is a kind of freedom that few people ever experience. One of the remarkable aspects of winning in silence is how it compounds over time. Each small victory you win privately becomes a building block. Each day you show up without fanfare adds to your capabilities. Each act of private excellence strengthens your foundation. And then, at some point, the compounded effect becomes impossible to ignore. Consider the person who writes in private for years. They are not posting their work online. They are not seeking agents or publishers. They are simply writing, improving, developing their craft. At some point, they have thousands of pages of excellent work. They have decades of practice. Their mastery is real. And when they finally share their work, it speaks with the authority that only comes from genuine depth. The world suddenly recognizes what they have been building all along. But the real work was done in silence. Or consider the entrepreneur who quietly builds their business, who focuses on making their product excellent rather than on getting press coverage, who is more concerned with genuine customer value than with marketing hype. At some point, the business begins to dominate its market, not through flashy disruption, but through steady excellence. The world catches on. But the real victories, the real innovations, the real wins happened in the unglamorous work of building something excellent. The power of compounding invisibility is that it allows you to build on a solid foundation. You are not constantly correcting course based on the noise of public attention. You are not chasing trends or trying to please the crowd. You are simply building consistently with excellence, guided by your own clarity about what is right. And this consistency, this singular focus, this refusal to be distracted by external noise, allows you to build something more durable and more excellent than someone who is constantly adjusting for applause. Moreover, winning in silence gives you the advantage of surprise. By the time the world notices you, you are already far ahead. You have already won the war while everyone else was still debating its possibility. The competition has been running fast in the visible realm while you have been running just as fast in the invisible realm, gathering far less attention but accumulating far more advantage. Conclusion: the quiet victory. We have come to the end of our meditation, though truly the practice is just beginning. The Stoic Guide to Winning in Silence is not a destination you arrive at. It is a way of being you cultivate, day by day, in the small choices and the large commitments, in the moments no one is watching and the challenges everyone will notice. To win in silence is to understand that victory is internal before it is external. It is to make a commitment to excellence that does not depend on external validation. It is to cultivate a character so strong, so integrated, so authentic, that you do not need anyone's applause to know your own worth. It is to do the work because the work is worth doing, not because you will be recognized for doing it. This path is not for everyone. It requires a kind of faith. Faith in the idea that good work will eventually be recognized, that character matters, that virtue is its own reward. It requires a willingness to be misunderstood, possibly forever. It requires the courage to pursue excellence in a culture that often values visibility more than quality. It requires the discipline to maintain high standards when lower standards would be easier and no one would know the difference. But for those who choose this path, there is a reward that no external recognition can match. There is the deep, unshakable peace that comes from knowing that you have been true to yourself. There is the freedom that comes from not being dependent on others' judgments for your sense of worth. There is the profound satisfaction that comes from building something of genuine excellence, something that is true and real, whether or not the world ever notices. The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the greatest empire on earth, retreated into his own mind to write meditations that he never intended for anyone to read. Epictetus, a slave, found more freedom than his master, because he had freed himself from the need for external validation. Seneca built his wisdom in private, knowing that the real work of becoming a wise person happens in solitude. You can do this too. You can join this lineage of quiet excellence. You can build something real. You can develop a character of genuine strength. You can win in silence, knowing that the greatest victories are the ones no one sees, and that the person you become in private is the person you truly are. The world will notice eventually, or it won't. This is beyond your control, and therefore not your concern. Your concern is simpler and more profound. To do excellent work, to develop genuine virtue, to become the kind of person you can respect when you look in the mirror. To win in silence is to take your power back from the watching world and place it firmly where it belongs, in your own hands, in your own character, in the private space where you decide who you are and who you will become. This is the Stoic way. This is the path to winning in silence. And if you are reading these words, it is a path you can walk, starting now, with the next choice you make. In the quiet spaces between tasks, in the moments no one is watching, in the daily choice to do better than you did yesterday, there lies your victory. Tend to it, build on it, let it compound. And one day you will look back and realize that while the world was busy looking elsewhere, you were busy becoming someone exceptional. Subscribe to this channel, not because you were told to, but because you know somewhere in your chest that this conversation is one you need to keep having. Love is not simple. Marriage is not simple, but understanding, real, honest, courageous understanding, makes both of them possible. This channel is committed to that understanding every single week. Join this community, subscribe right now, and share this with someone who needs to hear that what they are feeling is real, that they are not alone, and that it is never too late to start loving better.